Okay, so if you have made it to this video, that tells me that you are in some way, shape, form, or fashion familiar with LexxiKhan Presents Publishing, myself, or another member on our team. And therefore, I'm going to skip all of the fluff and we're going to head straight into the material for today. So to jump right all into this, I do want to just show this book publishing journey because the fact of the matter is this: you can very well publish your book without needing the assistance of anyone else. You don't need me. You don't necessarily need my team. You can do all of this by yourself. You can. And I know that because I did it. I did it myself before there were webinars, YouTube videos, and tutorials. I did it. So that's why I'm stressing that you could do this without anybody. But if you are here, it is because you've tried it and you've recognized that this is a mental marathon and it would be nice to have some help along the way. So to just kind of show it to you guys, this is as simple as it gets. It gets no simpler than this. Step one, you plan your book. If you fail to plan, you plan to fail. Okay. Step two, you write out the book. You put the pedal to the metal, lead to paper, pen to pad, whatever, and you write it. Step three is when you edit, and that's when you go back and forth with an editor. Step four, you publish it and share it with the world. It's that simple, okay? To put things into perspective, we're going to go out through the step one, and we're going to go through this together. So I'm going to be pulling a lot from this book, Charge It to the Game 2, just because it's a lot of what I used in this training material. So just to kind of give you a backstory with the 4 steps, this entire book in its entirety, which is over, I don't know, like almost 200 pages, this entire book was planned in full detail, first and foremost. I planned the whole story. I planned each chapter. I planned each character. I planned my settings. Everything was planned out first. Then once that was done, all of these pages, all of these words on these pages didn't come out of nowhere. Okay. I had to grab my handy dandy pen. This just happened to be the one on my desk and then get to work. Okay. Fun fact, mostly all of my books are written by hand first. Step 3 is edit. That's when I take my completed book and I hand it over to an editor, and we keep swapping and swapping for at least 2 to 3 rounds until I get back a book that says, this has been fully edited. I'm comfortable. Let me slap all of this stuff that I've planned and worked on together and publish it and release that to the industry. That's literally what happens. It's all the other stuff in between that makes it for an interesting ride. And that's why you have us. So let's just jump into it. Today, what I really want to talk about is the importance of planning. And so I do want to take a moment. Said I was going to skip this. I'm Keaidy Bennett, bestselling author, ghostwriter, publisher, and founder. And depending on when you're watching this, because we're in the process of going from LLC to corporation, depending on when you're watching this, I may be the president, I may be the CEO of LexxiKhan Presents Publishing. Fun facts about me: I published my first book completely broke. Okay, literally having to walk to a McDonald's in order to use their Wi-Fi to try to get access to resources to figure out how to maneuver in this publishing space by myself. Okay, so that's why I'm telling you, you can do it by yourself, but why? You don't have to. Okay, so that's just a little bit about me. Jumping right into the art of planning. So we've got your story title should go right here in the middle. That's something that I've always done. And look, it's nothing crazy. You've seen these things before. These tools that we're going to be using, you've seen this before. There's several different types of ways to outline it. I'm just going to go with this one because it's my absolute favorite. There's other ones that I use for other things depending on what I'm creating, but this way of planning is my absolute favorite. So when we start off, I usually put the story title in the middle. So if that were this book, you would see Charge It to the Game 2 right in here where story title is. Okay. Chapter 1, I like to put, hey, this is what's happening in chapter 1, key details, interesting stories, important information. You know, do new characters arise? Is it a flashback? Is it a flash forward? Giving us a little insight. Is it any new characters introduced? I love to do things like this, So that way it's perfectly understood. Okay, perfectly understood of what is needed, what is required of me in each and every chapter. And this is a rough draft. If I were to really show you guys what my outlines look like, you wouldn't be able to read them, period. Okay, they're going to look like a mess. It's going to look all over the place, whatever. It's going to be very difficult to read. But I pack it in with information, okay, to give you guys a little bit more detail. So, you know, we do that and we pack it in with information. Once we've done that, the very next step that we're going to do is we're going to restart this process all over again. Only we're going to do this now for chapter 1, right? So in chapter 1, we're going to discuss what are some of those main points. Those little bullet points that I listed in that last example now become main points. What's something interesting that happens here? List out in more details, okay? Because you're going to be putting all of this together to make your book. All of this is going to be what you compose together and what you put together in order to give you the steps that you need. So when you're ready to get to step 2, it's not a guessing game, because between step 1 and step 2 is where a lot of people start, because a lot of people skip over step 1 and they go straight to writing, find themselves in some sort of hole or whatever they can't figure out, and then they use an excuse. I know I might offend some people with this, but I do believe here at LexxiKhan Presents Writer's Block, I do believe it's an excuse. Plumbers don't have plumber's block, right? They just get out and do what they got to do. So writer's block here, I'm going to treat it as an excuse. And usually that excuse, which if you haven't watched that video, you'll get to it, usually falls under a fear, okay? Either way, when we do step 1 to step 2, all you're doing when you get to step 2 is just taking all of this stuff right here and writing it and outlining it and making sure that you're putting your readers into that space. Okay. That's why you would think this shouldn't require a lot of time, but I'm going to make this across multiple videos because this is why a lot of people stop. A lot of people sell themselves short because of improper planning, because of failure to plan. So they fail to launch and they can't understand, why is it that I have this interesting story? Why am I a phenomenal writer and I cannot finish a manuscript? It's right here. So like I said, we do one for the entire book. Then we do one for each chapter. Okay. And then I'll come back to that one. And then I like to do one for each character. That is why I usually get, you know, accolades for having well-rounded characters, because I take time to plan this too. You know her shortcomings. You know the things that are going to help her get ahead and the things that are going to cause friction, cause tension, because I outline it here, right? And I intentionally did this for a reason, because I want to show you guys something. So you guys can take a moment to pause or to look at these forms. I mean, I'm going to upload it somewhere else for you to see them. But if you take a look and you really look at this, right here, I say she doesn't show emotions. This is major, because Tamia Santiago in this book, Charge It to the Game, she's very meticulous, right? For those of you guys who don't follow this story, she ends up taking over her dad's drug dynasty after he's murdered. And so it's because of this role she has to play. She realizes she's a female in a male-dominated industry. She cannot afford to show any emotions. As you go on in the season, you learn that a lot of it as well is a defense mechanism for her. But that stuff we unpack later, right? So in this one, I want to focus in on this one, because when we get to the chapter that I've outlined, I want you to see how coming at this with a plan allows you to write with a purpose and allows your gifts and your talents to really shine through. Okay. And it comes from just being thoroughly prepared. So a couple other things real quick to know about her. She's very prideful. She likes to keep herself and everyone around her to a certain standard. She likes things done with excellence. It's a gift and a curse. Okay. Because she is prideful. She's not always asking for help. She's not always telling people how she feels. She's not, so these are things that hurt her as well. I know these things before I even start writing. So when I start mixing in other characters and those developing relationships, and we start going over all of these different things, I know it's going to be a hindrance to her. It helps me. It makes my job easier when I get to step 2. Okay. So now going back to that last slide, right, where we said chapter 15 in this book of it's titled A Hood Love Story. That's why it's here in the middle. So I know when I come back and I look at it, what I'm looking at. So I'm looking at A Hood Love Story, chapter 15. It opens with, why can't I stop crying? Remember, our not emotional character has shocked our readers, because by the time we get to book 2, 15 chapters in, our audience isn't used to seeing this type of behavior from her. This is not her to the audience. So she opens up with, why can't I stop crying? And she's just experiencing her first breakup. These are a lot of things for her. So Miss Cruz in this story is, kind of like just a loving grandmother who just naturally takes her in just from loving her parents, but she's not her biological grandmother. In this moment, because Tammy is raw, she's vulnerable, she's honest. Miss Cruz, who had been withholding certain information because Tammy's usually very prideful, she only does things to her benefit sometimes, didn't give Tammy certain information and certain things intentionally because she knew she's going to hurt herself if she gets this information too early. Now that Tammy's opening up and we can see that, what ends up happening here is you have Miss Cruz willing to be vulnerable in ways that she wasn't able to be before. So now here she is, she's softer, she's offering advice, she's answering some of Tammy's relationship questions that up until this chapter, she's kind of been ducking, dodging, just avoiding altogether. So Tammy then, in the midst of all of this, gets all of this information. She's given a space to where she's able to process her emotions, and she's actually encouraged to do that. So she decides to hide out for 2 weeks. Completely different to Tammy and her world, because Tammy and her world is building a legacy and is building a dynasty and works 16-hour days, right? In the last slide, we recognize she's business oriented. 16-hour days are a common thing for her. So her hiding out for 2 weeks, that's immediately sending out red flags to people in her world and to the readers in ours. They know that's not how she moves. So when she finally gets home, she's greeted by her father. Okay. So for those of you guys who have not read the story, I mean, it's all promoted throughout the thing. Her father's going to die. So this is actually the chapter, like her last moment of interaction with her father. And she's so in her head. Mind you, this is how we keep them and we hook them. One of the things that you will hear me say often is that my readers are not finished with my book until I say they're finished. And I do that because I plan it intentionally like this, okay? She gets home, she's greeted by her father. The readers don't know that this is the last time they will see Tammy and her father interact. They don't know that. They just know that from book 1, she expresses the lack of relationship she got at those key pivotal moments. She still addresses him lovingly, right? But when we get to book 2, we realize this girl was a whole teenager before she actually got to be around her father. Okay. And so this is a big deal for her, but she's so wrapped up in her world and in her feelings and in her emotions. She has absolutely no idea that this is the last time she will ever experience her father. So what do you think is going to happen to a character who's not really emotional, who's not showing emotions, who's getting ready to have her world turned upside down? Right. It makes for a very interesting thing when I open up in chapter 16. We don't talk about that here because it's not what this is for. But when we open up in chapter 16 and she's reading something at his funeral, right? We're having to see this character who's not really emotional, who's gone almost, a book and a half without having to show a lot of emotions. And now all of those emotions that she's tried to hide are just piling up on top of her. Okay. So her father greets her when she gets home. Dad admits that he knows that she's dating pretty much like a rival drug dealer, if you will, one of his competition, one of his ops, if you will. So he admits that he knows that she's dating this person. Okay. Mind you, she's in her, these are all of the things our readers are privy to. She's not really emotional. She's not whatever, but she's really emotional about this guy. And now her father, who's teaching her about business and grooming her about business, is trying to ask her about someone who's his ops. And she's having to process these feelings because technically they're not really together. So she's having to process that, and she's not wanting her father to be right. Here's where her prideful comes in. Her father is trying to warn her like of guys like him and in that lifestyle. And so she's not wanting to just outright come out and say, well, we're not together, right? But that's something that she's having to deal with at the moment. Okay. But dad admits, hey, I know you're dating Patrick. Let's talk about it. He finally gets her to open up. She sees a concerned father. She knows he genuinely cares. She's ready to finally open up. Okay. This chapter ends with, and this is why I always love putting my opening and my endings. But this chapter ends with father pleading her, like, come on, bro, like, get a regular guy. I know what a guy like Patrick's going to be able to offer you. Okay. And the very last part of the chapter, let me see if I can grab it for y'all real quick. The very last part of the chapter ends with her dad making a promise to never leave her. Mind you, her father's also not emotional. Like they call him a heartless lion. You okay? Like he is just a man about his business. That's where she gets it from. Mirrors a lot of that behavior. But it ends with, I'm your father. And even though I've never told you this, I want you to know that I love you more than anything. I only want the best for you. And I'm going to be here for you always, no matter what. Nothing is going to keep your old man away from you ever again. That's how this ends. So for our characters in the beginning who were waiting for this moment of like, we know Tammy wants a relationship with her father. We know that. But she's so prideful. He doesn't know that. He finally cracks, gives her what she wants. And the very next scene opens. She's reciting a poem at her father's funeral about not honoring the day, the last moment she had with him, right? Because we're always so busy thinking, oh, I got tomorrow. That's essentially what that poem was written about. But I was able to smoothly transition and outline and show you all of these different things, right? Just in that one chapter, I showed the ups and downs of her being prideful. I showed that firecracker energy that she has. I showed that loyalty to a fault, right? Because she's willing to be loyal to Patrick, even though dad and grandma are like, bruh, here's some relationship advice you can use. Okay. We can show that we unpacked her not showing any emotions because she opened the chapter with crying. Okay. And then also what is not noticed here, right, is that because we recognize she's business oriented, she loves money and power, she just took a 2-week break. How does this impact her? How does this affect her? These are things that will continue to be unpacked as we get onto the rest of the book and the rest of the chapters. But doing this is so easy because I've done the work. I know what is supposed to be where, right? So I'm giving you, there's 8 chapters here. I think there's 17 chapters in this particular book. 18. So if you have to make a couple pages of this, do what needs to happen, do what you need to do. But at the end of the day, you should have some sort of plan when you're working with anybody. Somebody should be able to come to you and say, let me see your plan. Let me see your outline. Let me see what you have. Because you have it all right here. If you get if you get step 1, which is to plan like your life depends on it. Step 2 is done because you know what goes where. So now it's just a matter of, so for example, now it's just a matter of when you get there, it's plugging in those little small minuscule details that you probably didn't think or didn't have enough space or information to put here. You just literally translate that and you put that when you get to step 2. Okay. So this is just one of the ways in which we do book planning here. There are other videos. I highly encourage you to check that out. If you see this and you're like, girl, I've been writing little stuff like this since I was a jit and it just is what it is. You know, that's fine. I got a couple other styles and ways in which you can outline this. So don't discredit this yet. I want you to just really hear me when I say this. If you fail to plan, you plan to fail. That's it. That's the biggest thing I want you to take away from this, because this is your publishing journey. It is this simple. Plan, write, edit, publish. It is that simple. Okay. This is where a majority of your time should go in the beginning. And this, because this, the success you do here directly correlates to how well you do here, directly correlates to what you're going to do when those 5 fears, or those 5 reasons that you've convinced yourself you can't do that, they show up between here and here. So you've got your plan. Between here to here is where you're going to see one of those 5 fears come into place, one of those 5 things holding you back, right? How you handle those things depends immensely on what you do here. So you will always hear a lot of time, energy, whatever given to the idea of planning, y'all, because it's needed and it's necessary. So at least for this video, I want you to take, if you don't do anything else, if you say, girl, I'm not going to do a web, fine, don't do a web. You ain't heard me. I got some other ideas for you though. And I'm going to put some videos together, put those out there so that you guys can see that. But in the meantime, between time, I want you to put it in your head. If you fail to plan, you plan to fail, because that is absolutely what happens. If you think for a moment, you're going to do a long, winding journey like this to a path of 60, 70, 80,000 words, and you have no plan. No one's doing a marathon without a training plan, right? They usually have a trainer. They usually have some sort of exercise routine and plan. No one's going out there to do a 5K without all of that. Why are you sitting down in front of your laptop, your notebook? Some people are using their phones without it, without a plan, without a coach, without an idea. And then being confused when you get here and you're using an excuse like, oh, I have writer's block. Okay. So my challenge to you today is to, if you don't do anything else with this video, put it in your head. If you fail to plan, you plan to fail. So this isn't for you, fine. Let's go watch those other videos on some other techniques we have for planning. In the meantime and between time, I want you to start at least mentally thinking, how can you plan and orchestrate this in a way that you can easily write it out? Your book editor, your book publisher can understand it. You, more importantly, understand it, and it makes it easier when we get to step 2. So if you do nothing else with this video, put it in your head. If you fail to plan, you plan to fail, because you absolutely positively do.